I used to think secrets kept people safe. That hiding who I was would protect me from judgment, rejection, or something worse, loneliness. But now, when I look back at those quiet evenings in the apartment I shared with Ryan Carter, I realize secrets don't protect, they rot you from the inside until they find their way out. Our apartment sat on the edge of the city, halfway between the noise of downtown and the stillness of the river. Ryan had found it first, a two-bedroom space with creaking floors and a balcony that barely held two chairs. I moved in 3 years ago, when we were both just starting our careers, him in advertising, me in graphic design. He was confident in that effortless way that drew people in, while I preferred staying in the background, editing, sketching, keeping my world small. He was the kind of roommate people brag about having. He cooked. He cleaned. He paid rent on time. And yet, there were moments, tiny, almost invisible, when I caught myself noticing things I shouldn't. The way his hair curled when he stepped out of the shower. The sound of his laughter drifting through the thin wall between our rooms. I told myself it was just admiration. Friendship. Gratitude. But the truth had a different texture, and I felt it every time he smiled at me across the kitchen counter. I had a boyfriend then, Caleb Ross. We'd met in college, fell into each other's lives easily, like two people who wanted the same quiet kind of love. He lived 3 cities away, working long hours as a nurse. We promised to visit every month, but as time passed, the visits grew fewer, the conversations shorter. Lately, our calls felt like routines we were trying to remember, not something we wanted. Still, I stayed loyal. Or tried to. Ryan didn't know about Caleb. He didn't know about me. I told him I was single because it was easier than explaining. Easier than watching his face shift if I said the word boyfriend. He'd never said anything cruel about gay people, never joked in that way some men do to fill silence. But fear doesn't wait for proof, it lives off imagination. Most evenings, Ryan would come home after his gym sessions, toss his keys on the counter, and ask what I wanted for dinner. He liked to cook in that casual, instinctive way, throwing together ingredients that somehow worked. I'd sit at the bar, sketching while he moved around the kitchen. We talked about work, random things online, the neighbors upstairs who argued about everything. It was easy, comfortable, and for that reason alone, dangerous. One Friday night, the kind that hums with distant city life, I was on a video call with Caleb. We hadn't spoken properly in days. He was tired, half listening, scrolling through something on his phone while I told him about a new project. I tried to sound cheerful, but my words felt heavy. Then the screen flickered, and his voice softened. "Ethan, are we okay?" Before I could answer, I heard the front door open. Ryan walked in, carrying takeout and humming something under his breath. I panicked, fumbling with the laptop volume, whispering, "I'll call you later." Caleb frowned. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, just, Ryan's home." I ended the call before I could explain. Ryan dropped the food on the counter, glancing at the still glowing laptop. "Did I interrupt something?" His tone was light, but his eyes stayed on me for a second too long. "No, just work," I said, closing the lid quickly. My voice sounded forced, brittle. He shrugged, smiled, and started unpacking the boxes. "Hope you're hungry. I got that Thai curry you like." We ate in silence, the kind that buzzes with unspoken things. The smell of lemongrass filled the room. Ryan talked about a new client at work. I nodded, barely listening. My thoughts were still tangled in that call, Caleb's question, Ryan's timing, the way my heart jumped when their worlds almost collided. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Ryan's expression in my head, wondering if he'd guessed anything. The thought scared me more than I wanted to admit. I wasn't ashamed of who I was, but I wasn't ready to be seen, not by him. The next morning, Ryan was already up, making coffee. Sunlight spilled across the kitchen tiles, and for a moment, everything looked too normal. "You were up late," he said, handing me a mug. "Couldn't sleep." "Work stuff?" "Something like that." He leaned against the counter, studying me. "You know, you can talk to me, right?" You always look like you're carrying a storm around. I forced a laugh. I'm fine. Just tired. He didn't press further, but the way he nodded, slow, thoughtful, made me uneasy. It wasn't judgment in his eyes, but curiosity. Maybe even concern. And that was worse. Because concern could turn into closeness, and closeness could unravel everything I'd built to protect myself. That weekend, Caleb texted that he'd be busy again. Double shifts, he wrote. I'll call when I can. I stared at the message longer than I should have, realizing how routine disappointment had become. Ryan, meanwhile, spent Saturday fixing a broken shelf in the living room. I offered to help, but he waved me off. Just keep me company, he said, grinning. So I sat nearby, pretending to read while he worked. His arms flexed under the weight of the wood, his focus steady. I caught myself watching him too long, and when he looked up suddenly, I dropped my eyes to the book that he chuckled. You're terrible at pretending to read. Maybe it's a boring book. Or maybe you're distracted. He said it teasingly, but something in his tone lingered, half a question, half a dare. I smiled, trying to deflect. You wish. He laughed, but I could tell he noticed the flicker in my voice, the hesitation I couldn't quite hide. That night, when I went to bed, I lay awake listening to him play guitar in the living room. The melody was soft, thoughtful. I'd never heard him play before. I closed my eyes and imagined telling him everything, about Caleb, about the fear that followed me everywhere. But when the song ended, silence returned, heavy and absolute. That I in the dark, I whispered to no one, you can't fall for him. But secrets don't care about rules. They grow in quiet rooms, between shared meals and late-night laughter, until one day, they stop being secrets at all. That night, as I drifted between guilt and exhaustion, I heard the faint creak of the floorboards outside my door. A pause. Then retreating footsteps. I opened my eyes, heart pounding. Maybe it was nothing. Or maybe Ryan had been standing there, about to knock, thinking better of it that I didn't sleep after that. The truth was already stirring, restless and inevitable, waiting for its chance to be seen. Rain has a way of softening everything, edges, voices, thoughts. That night, it blurred the city into quiet motion outside our windows. Ryan and I had both stayed in, the storm had cancelled his plans, and I'd used it as an excuse not to call Caleb. Thunder rolled far off, the lights flickered, and then, as if the world decided we'd had enough control for one evening, the power went out. Ryan laughed into the darkness. Perfect timing. I heard him move toward the kitchen, his voice tracing the space between us. You got candles somewhere? Drawer by the sink, I said, trying to sound casual. My heart had already picked up its own rhythm, too aware of his nearness, the sound of his footsteps on the wooden floor. Within minutes, the apartment glowed faintly. Candlelight danced on the walls, turning everything gold and unfamiliar. Ryan handed me a glass of whiskey, his eyes reflecting the soft flame. If we're stuck here, might as well make it interesting. I took it, the warmth spreading through my fingers. You always find a reason to drink. He smirked. You always find a reason not to. It should have been an ordinary moment, two roommates waiting out the storm, but something about the stillness made it heavier, like words hung in the air waiting for permission to exist. For a while, we talked about nothing, work deadlines, the noise upstairs, an old TV show we both half remembered. But then his voice softened. You ever feel like you're living someone else's life? The question caught me off guard. I looked at him, his face flickering between light and shadow. What do you mean? He shrugged, staring into his glass. Just, some days I wake up and wonder if this is all I'm supposed to be. The job, the same routines. It feels too quiet. I understood more than I wanted to admit. Yeah. I get that. He looked up, studying me as though searching for the rest of the sentence. You ever wish you could start over? I wanted to say yes. To tell him I'd been starting over in small, secret ways for years, each lie about who I was, each avoided question. Instead, I said, sometimes. He nodded, and the silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was understanding. Two people pretending not to notice how much they'd revealed. The rain kept falling, heavy against the glass. I could smell the faint sweetness of Ryan's cologne, something woodsy and warm. I tried to focus on the candlelight instead, on anything but him. But the room felt too small, my thoughts too loud. When my phone buzzed, it startled both of us. The screen lit up, Caleb Bluehart calling. My chest tightened. Ryan's eyes flicked to the phone, then back to me. "You should get that," he said quietly. I hesitated. "It's fine. It can wait." He raised an eyebrow. "You've been ignoring calls all week. That your girlfriend?" I almost said yes, the lie automatic, but the look on his face stopped me, open, curious, not mocking. I heard my own voice before I could stop it. "Boyfriend." The word hung there, fragile and irreversible. Ryan didn't move for a long second. The candle crackled. Then he set his glass down and said softly, "Okay. Okay." I repeated, unsure what I'd expected, shock, discomfort, distance. He gave a small smile. "Yeah. You don't have to hide that, man." I felt the air shift, something heavy leaving my chest. But underneath the relief was something else, fear of what might come next. "I wasn't sure how you'd take it." "I'm not an idiot," he said gently. "You think I didn't notice you avoiding questions? You don't have to explain anything." There was no judgment in his tone, just quiet acceptance that felt both comforting and dangerous. For the rest of the night, our conversation wove in and out of easy topics, music, food, people we'd dated. Ryan told me about his ex, a girl he almost moved in with before realizing they wanted different lives. I listened, laughing at the right moments, but part of me was somewhere else, replaying the way he'd said, "You don't have to hide." Over the next few days, something changed between us. Subtle, invisible, but real. He seemed to notice small things, how I took my coffee, how I bit my lip when I was thinking. He started waiting for me to get home before eating dinner. The space between friendship and something more began to blur, though neither of us acknowledged it. One evening, he found me on the balcony sketching. "You always draw when you're avoiding something," he said. "Maybe I just like quiet." "Sure," he said, leaning against the railing beside me. "You look like someone trying to outdraw his own thoughts." I smiled despite myself. "You should write fortune cookies." He grinned. "And you should stop pretending you're fine." His words landed deeper than he knew. I turned to look at him, really look at him. The city lights reflected in his eyes, and for a moment, everything I'd been holding back pressed hard against my ribs. I wanted to tell him how exhausting it was to live in halves, to love someone far away while falling for someone a few feet away. But I stayed silent. The next night, Caleb called again. The conversation was short, tense. He accused me of drifting away. I told him I was just tired. When the call ended, I sat there in the dark, phone still in my hand, guilt clawing at me. Ryan knocked on my door. "You okay?" I hesitated, then said, "Yeah." He stepped inside anyway, holding 2 mugs of tea. "You don't look okay." I smiled faintly. "You're getting too good at reading me. Maybe you're finally letting yourself be seen." We sat there, the glow from the hallway spilling across the room. The tea went cold between our hands. There was a moment, a breath, a pause, when our eyes met, and the air felt electric, almost alive. He didn't move closer, but he didn't have to. I could feel the pull. I set the mug down, heart racing. "Ryan, I can't," he stopped me gently. "I know." Silence again, thick with everything we weren't saying. Then, after a long pause, he asked, "Does he make you happy?" The question hit harder than I expected. I opened my mouth, but no words came. After a few seconds, I shook my head, barely. "He used to." Ryan nodded slowly, eyes soft. "Then maybe you deserve to be." He stood, leaving his mug beside mine, and walked out of the room. I watched him go, my chest aching with something that felt like both relief and loss. That night, I didn't sleep. The storm had passed, but the air still hummed with leftover electricity, something alive and unfinished. And as dawn crept through the curtains, I realized the secret I'd kept all these years had finally shifted. It wasn't hidden anymore. It was standing in the open, quietly waiting for whatever came next. The knock came early, soft but insistent, the kind that carries both familiarity and unease. When I opened the door, Caleb stood there, hair damp from the rain, eyes tired, smile unsure. It had been nearly 2 months since I'd seen him in person. The sight of him should have felt like home. Instead, it felt like memory. Surprise, he said, forcing a grin. I thought I'd come up for the weekend. I stepped aside to let him in. The apartment suddenly felt smaller, as though it wasn't built to hold all 3 of us, me, the man I loved, and the man I couldn't stop thinking about. Ryan was in the kitchen, barefoot, pouring coffee. His gaze lifted as Caleb entered, and for a moment, no one said anything. Then Ryan smiled politely, extending a hand. You must be Caleb. Caleb shook it, the gesture too formal, too practiced. And you're Ryan. The roommate. Yeah, Ryan said, tone neutral. Good to finally meet you. The morning played out in polite fragments. Ryan left soon after, saying he had errands, though I knew he just wanted to give us space. Caleb and I sat on the couch, the sound of the rain outside filling the silence. You didn't tell me much about him, Caleb said eventually. I didn't think there was much to tell, I replied, keeping my eyes on the window. That he studied me for a moment. You seem different. Distant. I tried to smile, but it came out wrong. It's just work. Life. He reached for my hand. Ethan, talk to me. What's going on? I wanted to tell him everything, that I was confused, that I'd started feeling things I didn't expect, that the loneliness between us had become a bridge someone else had crossed. But honesty felt like cruelty. So I said the first thing that would make sense. Nothing's wrong. He looked unconvinced, but he let it go. For the rest of the day, we moved around each other like strangers sharing borrowed space. He cooked dinner, I cleaned, both pretending we weren't falling apart in silence. That night, after he'd gone to bed, I stepped out to the balcony. The city glowed faintly, lights flickering like distant memories. I didn't hear Ryan come in until he spoke, didn't know he was visiting. I turned, startled. Yeah. He wanted to surprise me. Ryan nodded, hands in his pockets. Guess that's good. Yeah, I said, though it didn't sound convincing. That he studied me for a long moment, the space between us filled with everything we hadn't said. You don't have to explain, Ethan. I get it. What do you get? I asked, though I already knew, that you're trying to do the right thing. Even if it hurts. I looked away, my throat tightening. I don't even know what the right thing is anymore. Ryan exhaled, a sound halfway between empathy and restraint. Then start with what's true. Before I could answer, he turned and walked back inside. I stayed on the balcony until the cold made my hands ache. The next evening, Caleb and I went out for dinner. It was supposed to feel normal, grounding. Instead, every word felt rehearsed. He asked about my work, I asked about his shifts, and between us sat the quiet truth neither of us wanted to name. When we got back, Ryan was on the couch, watching a muted movie. Caleb brushed past him with a polite nod and went to bed. I stood there for a moment. Ryan muted the TV completely. He's a good guy, he said. He is, I replied, but... I hesitated. He deserves someone who's sure of him. Ryan leaned back, watching me carefully. And you're not. I shook my head. I thought I was. For a long time, I really believed it. He didn't speak for a while. When he did, his voice was quiet. Ethan, you don't owe me anything. Or him. But you owe yourself honesty. The room felt heavy with the weight of that truth. I sat down beside him, close enough to feel the warmth of his arm. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was thick, trembling with unspoken connection. "I never meant for this to happen," I said. "I know," he whispered. "Neither did I." There was no dramatic moment, no impulsive kiss, just the slow recognition that something irreversible had already begun between us. I wanted to stay there, in that fragile honesty, but guilt tugged at me until it hurt. I stood abruptly. "I should go to bed." Ryan nodded once, eyes following me as I left. Later that night, Caleb stirred when I slipped into bed. "Where were you?" he murmured. "Couldn't sleep." He turned to face me, his expression tired but searching. "Ethan, are you still in love with me?" I froze. The question hung there, sharp as glass. I opened my mouth, but only truth came out. "I don't know." He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "That's an answer." Neither of us spoke again. By morning, he'd packed. He didn't slam doors or demand explanations. He just said quietly, "I hope you figure out what you want," and left. The sound of the door closing echoed through the apartment long after he was gone. When I walked into the kitchen, Ryan was sitting there, a mug of coffee cooling in his hands. He looked at me, eyes cautious. "He left." I nodded. "I'm sorry," he said. That I shook my head. "Don't be. It was coming." He hesitated. "Do you regret it?" I thought for a long moment. Not telling the truth? No. Hurting him? Every second. He reached across the table, not to touch me but to close the space between us. "You did what you had to do." I met his eyes. "And what about you? What do you want, Ryan?" He gave a small, sad smile. "Something I can't have. At least not now." It was the most honest thing either of us had said. That night, he played guitar again, the same soft melody I'd heard months ago. I sat in my room listening, every note carrying the weight of what might have been. The song ended, and I whispered into the dark, "Thank you," though I wasn't sure if it was for him, or for the pain that had finally made me see myself clearly. Months passed. Caleb moved on. Ryan eventually took a new job across the city. We still texted sometimes, short messages, simple things. The connection never disappeared, it just shifted, quieter, older. One evening, scrolling aimlessly, I found a video Ryan had posted online, him playing that same melody, eyes closed, lost in thought. The caption read, "For the people who taught me honesty." That I smiled, letting the music fill the room. It didn't ache the way it used to. Love hadn't vanished, it had simply changed shape. It was no longer a secret, no longer forbidden. Just something that lived quietly in the spaces between memory and forgiveness, and as the final note faded, I realized I wasn't hiding anymore. I was finally living the life that belonged to me.